here's the scale. Am I going to die? Or is someone in my family going to die? Well, if they're not, then you can take the first two off. It's not that level of being, kind of paralyzing fear and so on. Have you fallen off a ship or you out sailing in the middle of the ocean, 100 miles from or 50 miles from the shore, and your boat's gone and you're there treading water and you've been circled by shark fins, or you at a barbecue and there's a mosquito kind of nipping away at your ankle. Somewhere on that scale, you need to define it, categorize it, and as quickly as you can, deal with that fear and create some reality and perspective to that fear. Because more often than not, it's on the bottom end of the scale. So my simplest one is when someone says to me, I'm worried about this or whatever, and I go, well, are you going to die? No, I go, okay, well, that's great. Let's cross that one off. And when you categorize it and you create logic, then you can have perspective, and then you go, well, you know what? It's not that serious. And I say to people, you're going to remember this in a year. You remember exactly what you're worried about today in a year. Can you remember what you were worried about on this day or this week a year ago? And of course, you're
Not a hope.
not a hope. So fear and courage, their experiences, their learned experiences, their conditioning, and you can change that conditioning. You can change absolutely anything in your mindset.
Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Bites. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. My guest today, Jason Dunn, has lived a life defined by reinvention, resilience, and extraordinary achievement. From being the youngest artist commissioned by the Intercontinental Hotel chain at just 19, to building a successful career as a CEO and leadership innovator, Jason has worn many hats. But his greatest transformation came when he turned his back on a heavy smoking habit, and despite never having learned to swim or ride a bike, he set out to compete in the Hawaii Ironman World Championships. Today, Jason is an elite ultra-endurance athlete, motivational speaker, and author of Unlimited, a powerful story of overcoming adversity, facing fears, and proving that transformation begins with one brave choice. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Doug, delighted to be here. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Good, mate. So since in the intro there we talk so much about all this exercise you do, what's your daily or weekly exercise program look like?
Ooh, Doug, a little different these days. So 62 in a couple of months. So yeah, these days I train for a couple of hours a day. It's typically, it's fairly diversified so that I spread the load around this fairly battered body I have these days as a result of so many accidents and so many hospitalizations. But yeah, look, I just, these days it's more um, more related to, pleasure, staying strong, longevity, feeling good, um, you know, adding more life to my days and more days to my life is essentially. So, but it was until a few years ago, my weekly regime would be 25 hours a week or so of pretty intense training. And when I converted from, Ironman triathlon and went across to just running because I moved back to Sydney and living in the, very heart of Sydney, it's and having had so many bike accidents, biking is not a wise pastime. And so I just ran. But typically for the last, it was sort of 15 years when I converted to just ultra marathons, I would be running between 150 and 250 kilometers every week.
Wow. Yeah, that's beyond me. That's one thing. Like in my 20s, I set a goal to run. For some reason, I decided to want to run 2 miles in 15 minutes, which is 3.2 kilometers. So I paced it, and I'd never run, and I hated running. And
Yeah,
I paced it out over 3 months, and I just started at the end. I had to run that in that amount of time. So I just came back
yeah,
to like today I have to run 500 meters in this many minutes, or I mean,
yeah,
whatever it was. And
yeah,
I did it. And the thing was, I set the goal. And on the last, because I'd paced out nearby my home with the speedo on my car, what distances were. So then on the
yeah.
final,
The old days.
yeah, D-Day
The old
came.
days.
Oh, well, we didn't
Yeah,
have phones or anything like that. You
yeah,
couldn't track
yeah,
distance, of course. So
yeah,
then the last day, I go to the police youth club where they've got a running track, and
mm,
I had to do, I think, 8 laps or whatever it was, 400 meters a lap. And I ran around and I did it in, beat the time, boom, and that's it. And then I never ran again. It was just like,
Right.
yep, boom, and yeah. And then talking about exercise, in my early 20s, I used to go to the gym a bit when I first became a professional firefighter. But then now when you say and you turn 62 in a couple of months, so do I. So I'm in December and we're pretty close in age. And I've only just this year, at the beginning of this year, started going back to the gym. And my youngest son's a gym junkie, built like a tank. And he's set up an app on my phone and he keeps changing my exercise programs. And I had a little message come up on my phone the other day. Congratulations, 100 workouts completed. So this year because my
Well
wife and
done.
I have been, given the advice that at our age, we need to start living heavy shit, like to keep our bones strong.
We do.
We've got to do some exercise, so we're starting to do that as well. So
Well done. Good for you.
yeah, finally back to it, and I enjoy it. I'm there at least 3 days a week, and my son's got three different workouts, so I don't get bored. I only do each workout once a week, and
Yep.
um, and then
Well
just when I
done.
get like confident with it and I know what I'm doing, all of a sudden I look at the app and it's all changed. I'm like, oh shit. But at least there's a video. I can click the video and watch what it means, and I watch someone do the workout.
Yeah.
So then I got to work out all the
That's a
weight again, and yeah, so
great way to go.
keeps me going. Yeah, it's good having the kids trying to keep you healthy. So yeah. Now in there we talked about your smoking habit. Um, how did you? How easy or hard was it to break that?
I think there were a bunch of habits. I know there are a bunch of habits. So if my my habits, my identity really was instant gratification. It was the shortest possible route to the most possible a pleasure, and how that manifested was that when faced with a choice, and I'm sure we're going to talk about choices a little bit today. I gravitated towards the choice often that involved the least amount of discretionary effort and gave the most pleasure for in return for the least amount of effort. So whether that was addictions, I mean they're addictions. They're addictions and conditioning within your mind to to pleasure, and which is where most humans are challenged by making those correct choices. So I just made a whole bunch of them. I would take the easier road as opposed to the harder road or route. I smoked, I drank probably a fair amount of alcohol, probably a few other different types of drugs along the way involved. So they're all addictions, and it's really interesting because there are some remarkable ultra athletes or athletes in the world that are converted addicts and confess to being addicts that have converted. So it's an addiction to something else that stimulates oxytocin or any other the great natural chemicals. So I just kind of swapped one for the other. So yeah, well, it was challenging, but and again, so in that bucket, you're making a choice from sitting on the couch watching TV, and back in those days, you could probably sit in your lounge room and smoke. I don't think people do that these days, but they're pretty easy decisions to make, and they're easy decisions until they're not. So something ultimately, I know what triggered me, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that because I'm sure some of your viewers or listeners can associate with some of these elements. But yeah, it was a choice, and the driver behind making the right choices or different choices and taking your life down a different pathway. For me, the catalyst to that was regret, consuming regret that regret for opportunities missed or squandered, from making the wrong decisions, taking the easier pathway. So my regret snowballed to the point that, I was consumed me. I was suffocated. I was snowballed to the point that I couldn't climb over it. And so I had to find a way to stop that consuming regret. So once you find purpose in life, a true purpose, and purpose is the driver of it's the first of the 14 steps to finding your own greatness. Then everything becomes, whether it's overcoming adversity, everything becomes, considerably easier once you find your purpose. So,
Guys, if you're on a path of developing your intuition, and I know you are, that's why you're listening here, then the Neurovisor is a tool worth checking out. It uses light and sound to guide your brain into deeper states of awareness, helping you quiet the noise, tap into your inner knowing, and strengthen your intuitive muscle. And who doesn't want that? There's no pills, no fluff, just 11 minutes a day to reset your mind and reconnect with your instincts. I've bought myself one last Christmas and I've added it to my daily practice, and the shifts are real. This is not a paid ad, but if you use the link in the show notes for more information, I do receive a small percentage of the purchase price. I highly recommend you check it out. So
yeah, I
did
mean,
was the Hawaii Ironman, did that become your new purpose at that time or?
well, if I can just backtrack for a
Sure.
moment.
Wait.
So,
Yep.
my my regret, at the age of 15, my boyhood dream of becoming a professional football player, or for the Aussie audience here, it's a soccer player. So I had I dreamed that was my life purpose. And as a kid in the UK, like most boys or children in the UK, that's one of the most common, consistent, and greatest dreams, is to become a professional footballer in, what is probably the greatest football league in the world. And that was all I dreamed of. I played 4 games a week, and at the age of 15, I had an offer of an apprenticeship for a club that was 2.5 hours away on the south coast of England, not in the top tier, but one league below. So it was full-time professional. And I studied pretty hard at school, so it was essentially, it was a choice, taking a risk for 2 years and perhaps not making it, because only 2 out of 40 apprentices made it in those days. And traveling 5 hours, there and back to the south coast, I would have had to have given up my school studies. So
So
it was a
you
very
would have had to do that instead of school, but you couldn't have done it after
maybe,
school.
maybe not. It just would have meant I would, if I continued my school studies, I would have, I would have done very poorly. So I made a decision with my head and not with my heart. Let it go, and then I started to, I'd go to the pub drinking at lunchtime from school at the age of 15, and a bunch of other stuff that I shouldn't have, lots of other stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. And so I let go of that dream, and my regret just snowballed. I was the person that said, after many drinks at a conference or a work function or wherever I was, I would tell people that I would say to them, I could have been a professional football player, like it was, a badge of honor. It was something to be proud of. But essentially, what it translated to was, um, I probably had the talent, but I made a logical decision instead of one with my heart. And maybe I didn't have the heart, maybe I didn't have the courage to actually, to go for the thing that was my dream. And so that was my regret. And it just snowballed. And over the years, I just kept saying to people, I could have, which was all about this monster, which is ego. And I looked in the mirror and I just liked myself. I
So
did.
I guess
I
every time you said that, you were reminding yourself that you had maybe not
I
followed your
was
heart. Yeah.
absolutely, well, and many times in between. That was just when it filtered its way to the surface, and I had this massive regret that was paralyzing, consuming. And not only that, but here I was being boastful, if you like, driving my ego that, hey, I was a damn good soccer player, and I could have made it. When really what that translated to was I didn't. And then so I found myself, raising a family, career. I think I was doing okay, but I had this. I just I obviously had a purpose in my family, but I had no real purpose. I know that sounds unusual, but I had no real purpose for me.
Well, they say
And
most men lead lives of quiet desperation. So it sounds like
indeed, they do.
internally that's what
Yep,
was going on. You had the purpose of the family,
indeed.
but you were
Yep,
quietly desperate as well.
absolutely. So I knew that I knew I needed to change it. I was, had this incredible discomfort with my own identity, and that who I purported to be was, I knew, I wasn't. And the irony of that is that you can fool most people, and sometimes you can fool everyone, but you can't fool yourself. And the only person that matters, that's truly relevant, is yourself. And so you need to completely reframe that. And I, quite by chance, and I realized this, I actually realized in the moment, I entered, some friends of mine entered me in a corporate triathlon, which was a 300-meter swim, 12K bike ride, and a 3K run, which is pretty small, pretty short. And for somebody, though, whose deepest fear, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about fears today, my deepest fear was drowning because I couldn't swim. The very thought of swimming 300 meters was paralyzing, and my ego wouldn't actually let me back down because they entered me in the event. And to sort of say to my really good friends, oh, I can't do this because I'm scared. Um, you know, Fortunately, my ego, that was one of the few times it served me well, would not let me back down. So I was faced with this paralyzing, terrifying thought of having to try and swim, try and teach myself to swim and learn to swim 300 meters in a river and not drown. And so that's essentially how it all started. And I talk a lot in my book, and my first book, and I've just finished the second one, about how paralyzing fears are. And I would drive to the swimming pool when I recognized that actually I needed to do this. I needed to actually try and teach myself to swim, otherwise I would drown. So I would sit there, and the first bunch of times I sat there, for 20 minutes in the car park, gripping the steering wheel, convincing myself, talking to that inner voice that, beguiles you and says, you should be fearful of this, easy to go home, or rubbish. And I would say, unfortunately, I never made the decision to turn the car around and go. I always went in. And so that was, for me, was an enormous thing to do. And we did the race, and I didn't drown. I almost drowned, but I didn't drown. And the euphoria and sense of elation that I found within, because I actually, I didn't take the easy road. In fact, I actually took the toughest road that I could possibly imagine at the time. The adrenaline from that, and the sense of pride, was as that was the kind of anti-fear, anti-regret tonic that I needed. And so a few days later, a week later, I was sort of searching for, well, hey, this is amazing. What am I going to do next? And I sat there watching the Hawaii Ironman World Championships, and it was a bit of it was a global event back then, but it was probably as much of this incredible, legendary kind of curiosity back then. And I watched it, and I finished watching it, and I'm sitting there with a cigarette and a cup of coffee on the couch on a Saturday afternoon, and I just finished watching it. I went, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna qualify for the World Hawaii World Championships. Had no idea how I was going to do that, because for each of the distances that I'd just done, and I hadn't ridden a bike since I was a kid, going up and down the street in the UK. It was 14 to 15 times, each leg was 14 to 15 times the race that I'd just done. So my mind couldn't comprehend or compute how I could possibly do that. I call those impossible goals or impossible feats, when I frame that. And I think hopefully the thing we're going to also talk about today is the incredible transformation people go through when they, and I call this greatness, your own personal greatness, is when you achieve something that you not long before that, or you believed that was impossible for you to achieve. And so I had no idea, and I set about, and again, one of the 14 steps to greatness is planning. So I actually had to start planning and working backwards how I was going to do that, because I not only needed to qualify for an Ironman in Australia, and there was only one Ironman in Australia back then. Obviously now there's many, and I needed to qualify for that, and then to make it to the World Championships, I needed to qualify in a race around the world fast enough for my age group. So that was essentially the road that I decided to take, and that was my first truly in life, my first really truly impossible goal that I pursued, and that for me, so my purpose, I make draw a lot of distinction between a goal or goals and a purpose, and I'll give you some examples because I think this is really important to understand. A purpose is personal and meaningful. A goal may well just be a milestone along the way. But, for instance, people talk about a goal. A goal is, let me give you some really common examples because, if you're human beings globally, the most consistent goals that people set themselves annually are related to well-being, their health, they're getting fit, they're losing weight, their goals, they're fairly kind of as they are, they're fairly hollow goals that don't have a great deal of meaning unless you actually create the meaning and the purpose behind that, which is why 90% of humans within a month of setting a New Year's resolution, it's folded. And their attempt has failed, and they were well intended, and maybe they started out for the first couple of weeks, and they tried to find some discipline, but ultimately they failed. And that's because it doesn't have meaning. So, for example, a goal to lose some weight really should be, I want to feel good. I want to put more life in my days. I want to increase, my life. I want to be able to do this when I'm 60 or this when I'm 40. I want to feel great. I want to feel the best. I want to feel alive. That's purpose. So for me, as opposed to I want to lose weight, that's just that's a nice to have hollow goal. So for me, my impossible goal was qualifying for the Hawaii Ironman and racing that. But my purpose was to go and find what I was really capable of. What my purpose became to find out, how far I could push myself, to find out where my limits were, and ultimately to reflect back and feel proud of myself. And I call that the armchair test. I came up the, the armchair test, which is imagine yourself, looking back at the age of 65 and imagine how you would feel at the age of 65, exactly where you are now with what you've done, what you've achieved, how you've lived, how you've treated other people, all of those things, your legacy. When you've got all the time in the world to reflect back on what you have and haven't done in your life, and that's your armchair test. And if you don't like what you see, you need to change it. In fact, you can
Yeah.
actually create a picture of legacy and say, well, what would I love? What would I sit there at 65, even if I didn't achieve, even if I didn't get there? And it isn't actually about achieving a goal. It's about what you do to go after your purpose. That is truly the most meaningful thing, which is how you feel about yourself and what would make me proud. And that's how I created my purpose. Was what would make me proud was leaving no stone unturned and and giving my purpose everything that I had and going after and find, and say having no regrets essentially would
Yeah.
be, if I didn't achieve that, if I gave it everything I had in going after that, then I would be proud of myself because I wasn't proud of myself to that point in time.
Yeah.
And that's what I
How
set
long,
out to do.
how long was it from when you sat on the couch and watched that Hawaii Ironman race till you were able to qualify to go in it? Was it, it
What?
wasn't months, I'm sure.
No. Well, I managed to, and again, an Ironman, for those that aren't aware, lots probably will, but it's a 3.8 kilometer, typically open water, often ocean swim. It's a 180 kilometer bike ride non-drafting. It's a 42K marathon. So just qualifying for an Ironman in Australia back then was, pretty challenging. And so it took me within 12 months of setting that, and these were the milestones in my high performance plan. And every noteworthy feat or every significant goal or purpose must have a plan, otherwise your days get lost, and then you don't have milestones, and you don't have daily activity, you don't have focus. And if you are going after something that's really significant for you, you need to make every day count. So I put together a plan. Part of that plan was to be able to race an Ironman, within 12 months, which I did. I had two serious accidents in that time. One of them was one of my three, four that were nearly fatal accidents that I've had, and but I qualified. It was my ninth, tenth attempt, tenth Ironman race when I finally qualified, and I was sort of trying to do a couple of years, typically within 6 months of each other, because I would race somewhere in, I'd race Australia, I'd race New Zealand, or I'd race Ironman Malaysia and New Zealand, or kind of those types of combos 6 weeks apart. So it
Yeah,
took me took
several
me
years, I
six.
guess.
Oh, it took me six. I think it was about close to 6 years, and
Yeah.
I and how you build resilience. I had many, many hospitalizations. I mean, in my life, I've had 35 hospitalizations, most of those, longer than 5 days. And so, in
Were
terms
they
of building,
bicycle accidents, most of them?
oh, they were everything. I nearly, some were earlier than that, Doug. I nearly died. My first one, when I was very close to death, was a car accident when a drunk driver just drove straight in front of me, and I couldn't hit the brakes, and I lost sort of half my teeth, had teeth coming in my face, had my jawbone coming under here. I had three skull fractures. I had 16 fractures in my jaw, and a whole bunch of other bodily injuries. But I did have a bunch, throughout my, through after the age of 35. I had quite a lot more, and illnesses and sicknesses, and one life-threatening condition, just a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, I'm kind of sidetracking. So it took me about 6 years. I think 3 years in, when I was actually really starting to become very competitive, I qualified at the Australian Ironman. Well, I qualified, but I hadn't ticked the right box on the form to qualify. So, so 6 months earlier, I'd put my form in for, and I rocked up at the Australian Ironman, and they do the check when you check in, you get your bag and all your gear, and they weigh you and all that kind of stuff. And the lady said, "I just checked some things." She said, "I see you don't want to qualify for Hawaii," and I went, "No, no, no, no." That's what I'm here for, to try and qualify. She said, "Okay." I said, "Can you fix that?" She said, "Yeah, we'll fix it." So I raced, and I went fast enough, and then they said, "No, sorry, you can't go." So I fought that for a couple of weeks, but in the end, I had to let it go. Um, I I raced Ironman Malaysia, and I came 37th overall, including the elite pros. And I missed, but I did that 2 years in a row, actually, and I missed qualification by one spot in my age group, and I would have qualified in every other age group. And I was 39 years of age. Every other age group bar my own, I would have qualified. Um, I think one time I missed by 45 seconds, and you don't know if the person in front of you or five people in front of you is in your age group, where the qualification is. So I missed by 45 seconds. Um, so yeah, they're the times that make you, when they're the times that kind of build resilience. And what transcends everything, no matter what happens to you, is your purpose. It transcends everything. So if I can urge anyone that's listening, if you haven't figured out your purpose, the thing that, apart from obviously your family and children, etc., but the thing that's just for you, that when you wake up in the morning, it's the very first thing you think of, that drives you, that validates you, that brings meaning to your life, then you got to go back, and you got to find your purpose, no matter what it is.
Yeah,
Whether
yeah.
it could be gardening, could be anything, but the thing that you love, that's for you, the thing that makes you feel good about you, then
Mm.
that's it. That's purpose. So yeah, it took quite a long while, and finally raced to Hawaii. It was, for me, that was redemption, and my my constantly finding courage. So courage is clearly the second of the 14 steps to greatness. And I'm much more structured in my second book in terms of finding, identifying where you are in life, the thing that, the next bus stop that you need to get on your greatness bus. The first one is it starts with purpose, but you're waiting at one of those stops, purpose, courage, planning, mindset, sacrifice, vulnerability, presence, stillness, resilience, belief, movement, nutrition, gratitude. You're at one of those stops and you're stuck. For most people, they're stuck, they're stalled, or perhaps they haven't even got going. And I've, the important thing is to recognize, exactly where you are, because that's the stop, that's the capability, the value, the skill that you need to work on. You need to work
Mm.
on next.
Interesting. And I'm going to tell you this and burst your bubble slightly. You have an unfair advantage in life with courage because of your age. I study an ancient form of Chinese medicine, and because our birthdays are so close, I've got a rough idea where you're at. And you and I both share, like we have fears, but
Yeah.
we both like a computer game. You ever played one of those race car games on the computer and you can adjust the car you get? You can put a turbocharger on it. You can put wet weather tires. You can put, mud tires, whatever. It depends what the race is going to be. You and
Yeah.
I are harder wired for courage than most other people.
Okay.
But there's other advantages they have that we don't have. So, because some people will be listening thinking, 6 years, like that's phenomenal courage when you couldn't swim, you were shit scared of swimming. You
Yeah.
hadn't ridden a bicycle since you were a little kid. And now you're going to take on this massive Ironman race where everyone you're competing against is an elite athlete. And probably everyone else in the race grew up
Yeah.
swimming, like
Probably.
but
Yeah.
probably, like that, or they were very comfortable swimming. And you and I have shared that because I've mentioned to you in the past,
You
I'm
have.
just, overcoming a whole big fear of swimming. And yeah, so you like, keep going with the courage because you have it. That's for sure. And interesting, something else you said earlier too, like the armchair test. I I did that many years ago too because I was a professional firefighter and an opportunity came across my path because I was looking to pack up my family, move overseas to a
Yeah.
tiny little island and build a scuba dive
Yeah.
resort. And one of the guys at the fire station said to me one day, because I was like 29 when I resigned, and he said, Doug, I got 5 kids. I admire what you're doing, but I couldn't do it. I don't have that sort of courage to do it. And I said to him, Bill, it's very scary for me to do it, but I can tell you what's scarier is 2 words, if only. And if
Yeah.
I get to 60 and I say those 2 words to myself, if only I had tried, but I didn't,
Indeed.
that will not make me feel good. So I'm willing to sacrifice everything and have a go.
Yep.
And at
Yep.
least I won't
Good for
live in
you.
regret. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
And,
that was the courage. Yeah.
and so, okay, so a couple of things, if I can, there on courage, Doug. So, one of, I think one of the things, the elements that motivated me was I'd been in financial planning for quite a lot of years, and I lived on the Sunshine Coast at this point in time, and which is kind of obviously one of, as you well know, one of Australia's retirement capitals. And much of my role as a financial advisor, kind of early on, was in places like Noosa Heads, was to sit there, which is a pretty nice place, was to sit there with people, just before, during, or after they'd retired, and and speak to lots of groups of people. I did a lot of public speaking around, creating independent wealth or lifestyle and things you want to do. And the greatest condition for most people who are retired is depression. And for that's often driven by regret because you arrive at a point in time in your life where you have all the time in the world to do all the things you want to do, which means you have a lot of reflective time. And most humans don't have sufficient stillness and reflective time during their life. They suddenly get it one day because their identity, which was their work and their colleagues, and all that's gone, and they're there. They got all the time in the world. They often don't have enough money because they didn't have enough making lots of reasons, but often not discipline and sacrifice and savings, but most people would have an element of, and sometimes a consuming element of depression because they have all the time in the world to look back on the life and look at all the things they didn't do, all the chances they didn't take, all the dreams they didn't go after. So for me, I absorbed that, and it aligned to the way I was feeling at the time. And I went, you know what? I don't want to get to that point in time and have what should be or could be the best part of my life, the best season, and have depression because that's pretty tough when you get 65, 70. um, you know that's a very tough place to be. So that helped me again have reflection, think about legacy, and find courage. The other thing with courage is, courage is essentially overcoming fear. So, probably let's talk about, you can practice and your experience will send you one way or the other in terms of courage. You know, a pathway of you grow more courageous or you grow less courageous. And so there's a lot of techniques you can employ that I've employed and I write about a lot now that I've observed other incredible, not people much more incredible than me, and they, how they build courage in terms of, and how I did in terms of perspective. And you can create, there's this kind of scale you can create to say, is my well, fear, if it's perceived fear, it's real. But what is the actual logic of the fear? And then you start to think about, well, here's the scale. Am I going to die? Or is someone in my family going to die? Well, if they if they're not, then you can take the first two off. It's not that level of being kind of paralyzing fear and so on. And are you in the are you have you, I don't know, fallen off a ship, or are you out sailing in the middle of the ocean, 100 miles from or 50 miles from the shore, and your boat's gone and you're there treading water and you've been circled by shark fins, or you at a barbecue and there's a mosquito kind of nipping away at your ankle, somewhere on that scale. And you need to define it, categorize it, and as quickly as you can, deal with that fear and create some reality and perspective to that fear, because more often than not, it's on the bottom end of the scale. So my simplest one is when someone says to me, I'm worried about this or whatever, and I go, well, are you going to die? Is someone else going to die? And they go, no. I go, okay, well, that's great. Let's cross that one off. And when you categorize it and you create logic, then you can have perspective, and then you go, well, you know what? It's not that serious. I won't remember. And I say to people, you're going to remember this in a year. You remember exactly what you're worried about today in a year. Can you remember what you were worried about on this day or this week a year ago? And of course, you're
Not a
not.
hope.
Not a hope. So, courage, and or fear and courage, their experiences, their learned experiences, their conditioning, and you can change that conditioning. You can change absolutely anything in your mindset.
All right, you mentioned earlier about a second book. Can you give us and I know you've only just finished it. What's the theme on that one and what
Um,
motivated it?
okay, cool. Well, can I just go back to, so what I set out to do, and again, this sits in the courage and fears. I've been in corporate life. I've been a CEO. I've run companies. My life and my private life's always been exactly that, very private. So until until 2 years ago, I think I had 10 Facebook friends. I set them an account 12 or 13 years ago. I set it up, posted once, and then just, and then I left it. No Insta account, no none of that. Obviously on LinkedIn because it was business, but it was always business. It wasn't personal. So yeah, so I kind of didn't have any of that. So for me, writing a book, um, and sorry, let me backtrack. I think I tried to find my own greatness and search for greatness since I was about 11, but it was driven by ego. up until, when I changed at 35. And it was still driven, by ego, which I tried to temper over time. But by the time I got to, 59, 60, um, I think I tempered that a great deal. And it's changed massively in the last couple of years. And I'll share for in a moment why. But for me to write a book about my life, given my fears of again our fears of failure and etc., it was very personal. So to write a book about my life, to some people, when you kind of write a more of a memoir, it kind of might feel again boastful or arrogant or whatever. But what in writing I didn't mean it to be a memoir. I wanted to convey or share with people how my life had transformed and how it had completely changed and how I'd gone to my second life at age 35, my new season, which was I now categorize as identify as my spring. The sort of writing a book about my life and then putting it out there, you know, I kind of went from this excitement, which you got to have to really get going on anything in life. It's got to challenge you. It's got to be exciting. So, I kept thinking, well, what if no one buys it? What if people, read it? What if no one wants to read it? What if people laugh? What if people, because it was really personal, what if people read it and they don't like it? What if it's a complete flop? And so I applied my learnings of finding courage and now my newfound purpose, my purpose is kind of metamorphosized into sharing. I reckon I'm pretty fortunate, and I've loved my life, and I wanted to share with people how the things that I changed, the things that I did that helped bring transformation. So that's what I had a crack at. And in writing my second book, I realized that I don't necessarily know if I did what I intended to do very well with my first book, which is called Unlimited, which was to convey, and connect with people, how they can change their lives. So, it's done pretty well. There's lots of people listening to, the audio book. I don't know how anyone could listen to my voice for, I can't listen to it for more than a minute. So it's done pretty well. And I'm off next week to the States and Canada. I'm actually working with David Goggins' brother Trunis. And so I'm going to promote that. Um, and I get, the thing I love is every single day from somewhere in the world, someone will come back to me and say, hey, you helped me change my life. And that is so moving and so special for me. But what I set out to do with the book two, which has just gone to the publishers, hopefully they'll publish it this time, is called Greatness Doesn't Care, is my second attempt at helping anyone that's alive to understand the significance of each of the 14 steps that most remarkable humans or most people that have found their own greatness in history, it could be everyday greatness, it could be on a global stage, the 14 steps to finding your own greatness. And that's what this time I've managed to become a much more um, adept writer, and I'm really excited because I think this time I've actually managed to communicate and convey so that anyone can read it and go, oh, that's where I am. I'm waiting at that bus stop. That's where I'm stuck. Or I'm at that bus stop, but I feel like I've got one foot on the bus, but you know, I need to accelerate that. I need to find mastery. So that's what I set out to do is go, well, here's the 14 steps. I spend a lot of time, there's a lot of time. The big chapters are purpose, courage, and mindset. I spend a lot of time talking about purpose. I spend a lot of time trying to convey greatness. And, you know, greatness is not a comparison. Most human beings, we're taught to be competitive. We're, I work in a lot of fitness Facebook fitness groups, and I try and help people, like on a large scale and individually. go after their own greatness. And I see people, they kind of say, "Oh, I only did this, or I only run 10 kilometers, or I only run at this speed, or I only whatever." And that's the first thing you got to do is go forget everybody else. There is 8.239 billion people on this planet. 8.239. And the one person that really, really matters in terms of greatness is yourself. And so it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You need comparison. Comparison is the killer of joy. Comparison is the killer of many things. And so all what it is doing something, achieving something, and maybe for other people, it may be anything that is truly meaningful to you, that makes you feel good about yourself. And so then you need to find, purpose and courage, etc., etc., etc. So that's what I've set out to do in this book, and hopefully, time will tell. Hopefully, I've achieved that.
Excellent. Yeah,
And
that's really cool. So those 14 steps are in the book.
the 14 steps, yes. I mean, yeah, greatness is not a step, but I wanted to spend a lot of time defining that. But yeah, each chapter basically goes purpose, courage, planning, mindset, sacrifice, presence, gratitude, stillness, resilience, belief, movement, nutrition. I don't think I've left any out. Some of those overlap. Some of those could sit within mindset, because mindset is a very big chapter. Um, one of the I think it's the last chapter. The last chapter is on vulnerability, Doug. And for me, vulnerability has actually driven almost the greatest amount of growth, personal growth for me throughout my whole life. So I think when I started writing Unlimited, a few 2.5 years ago, when I was 59, that taught me a new level of vulnerability. And what that changed the most is the ego that I'd tempered over the last kind of 23 or 4 years to that point in time, um, almost completely evaporated. And I feel like I have grown and become far more capable, a much better person since I've opened myself up and allowed myself to be vulnerable. Um,
What ways have you
and
done that? How have you become more vulnerable?
um, I think externally accepting, my shortcomings, my faults, my, just being me, just completely being me and going. It's not that completely being me and not worrying about other people. I do, but not thinking about what do people think about me. You know, this isn't about ego. How do I? It's just go. I just be me. I'm just real. I'm just far more real. I think I've always had an element of that that's been increasing, but these days I just am. So it's freedom. It is empowering. It's freedom, and being able to write a book. And I think I started that in the first one, but to write the second book and be even more, be on another level of vulnerability and being able to absolutely and completely and sincerely being open about, my faults, my addictions, my shortcomings, my kind of everything is cathartic. And um, I have had to learn again that the thing that it's often it's strange that you think the things in life that will, the way they'll be perceived is actually the opposite. And I
Yeah.
grew up, or, I was raised to be, not to talk a lot about emotions, to be strong, to be kind of resilient. And that served me well, for a bunch of times throughout my life. And, but then it served me well to a point, and then it held me back. And the greatest form of growth and human connection is vulnerability. And I love this. This is by far the best. This is my summer. Summer arrived for me at 60 years of age,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
by far my best season.
And like you say, like that connect, I believe we all are one, and that being vulnerable and being open in front of other people, you become real. People can see who you are and realize
Absolutely.
how much more like you they are. Because without that being vulnerable and
Absolutely.
opening up, people don't, we all
Yeah.
feel separate. But when we're vulnerable, we realize shit, he's just a dickhead like I am. Like I know I'm a dickhead.
Yeah.
I know I'm not very good
Absolutely.
at this. I know I
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
slip up in these areas. He's the same. Wow,
Yeah.
I'm just like him. That's wow, he ran the Ironman. Wow, I never thought, gee, if he did that, probably I could do something like that too. It's like, but if everyone's got that stiff upper lip, like you came from the UK
Yeah.
and Australia's very, orientated that way, stiff upper lip, no sex, please, we're British, like
Yeah.
we don't talk about that. We don't show emotions. We just, have you ever seen that TV show Downton Abbey?
I know of it. I
Okay.
can't
My
confess that I
my
haven't,
wife's
but I
right into it. She's seen the whole thing three times, and we went to the movies the other night because there's a movie of it at the movies. And it's set from 1915 to 1930, and they go through
yeah.
the war and the whole thing. And it's just this very British, no emotions, like da da da,
Yeah.
and all the women in the background trying to like, because back then women were very suppressed, but you're looking at the elite of society, and these women are trying to you know, open
Yeah.
things up and change how people are
Yeah.
thinking. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, if my wife didn't watch it, I'd have never seen it. But it's interesting, and it's Hollywood, but yeah, very much that way. And when we open up and we let people know, look, I've been honest, Jason, it doesn't happen very often, but I've been on a call like this. I'm interviewing people and I've started to cry in the middle of the
Mm.
podcast, and it actually doesn't bother me. I've edited little bits of it out, not so that people didn't know I was crying, but
Yeah.
the other person didn't speak through it because they held space for me very well. And there's like 10 or 15 seconds of silence while I'm trying to hold it in. So it's pretty boring. People think the podcast stopped. I've sort of cut that bit out, but I haven't cut out so that people wouldn't. I've left it in. They know that I like whatever. And the funny thing is, whatever we were talking about, I've talked about 10 times before on the podcast and it never got me. But that day, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
there was just,
Yeah.
the stars aligned and it
Yeah.
got me. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm happy. And like I say, since I've done that now, I cry in movies now. I never used to do that
Yeah.
years ago,
I
but
I
that was
I I I do that anyway.
yeah, my wife always
Effectively,
cried,
yeah.
not always be giggling at her, and and so it was just a given. And then I honestly think I cry more in movies now than she does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and it doesn't bother me. I'm like,
Good for you, mate.
whatever. Yeah,
Well done.
yeah.
Ah, good for you.
So
Whatever. And
yeah,
sometimes our environment, like often our upbringing, how we're raised, has a very fundamental effect on all of our psychology, whether that's our fears, our psychological, our neurological captors, a whole bunch of things, our demeanor. It's typically all governed by that, and then our experiences. And I had some pretty tough things to do in life, and I had a few tough gigs in terms of career and saving a couple of organizations and um, people. If you're the CEO, I had this perception that people wanted, you know, they wanted you, and not that I didn't connect with people. I would always just really try and connect with people, no matter what they did and who they are, and genuinely care about their development. But when it came to business, they they wanted to see that you had, they were worried. They want to see you had it under control, had strong leadership, etc. And somebody in my team that followed me, a couple of organizations, and incredible guy. And so I had this image that I thought I should be, and that was again partly my upbringing. And then I met him last year. Lisa and I met him and his partner in Florence for a dinner. We just coincidentally found out a couple of weeks before we were going to be in Florence on the same 3 days, exactly the same 3 days. So we had dinner, and I hadn't seen him for about a year, and he just said, "Mate, I just can't believe how different you are. I can't." He said, "I cannot believe, and I cannot believe how much you have changed." And
Wow.
I took that as it was meant as as a compliment, but it was just a profound observation, or an observation of profound change, and I was very grateful for that. So gratitude, by the way, is I also learned from a very young age. Gratitude is truly the foundation of happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you
So,
there. Yep. And yeah, and I loved what you talked about with vulnerability, and if men will take their guard down, take that, because when you're not vulnerable, it can help you live a life of quiet desperation as well. And
yeah,
that's not fun for
absolutely.
anybody.
If you're not, again, if you're not outwardly vulnerable, then often people don't know that you need help. They don't know to help you. And the other is, the other dynamic around that is if you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable, you don't actually face what it is that you need to face and that you need help with, or you know you don't grow. You don't grow. You don't accept. You're not vulnerable and can't let other people laugh at you at some of your silliness or your idiosyncrasies or whatever because you think you're above that or too perfect. You will never grow. You will never, truly grow. So you won't get the help you need. You won't help yourself. And here's the here's the irony of a couple of situations I've learned is often what you think is an image that you're purporting or doing is actually completely the opposite. And an example, a simple one, of kind of being more vulnerable. I've facilitated a lot of business sessions and a lot of training courses, a bunch of stuff like that. It's the people that sit there quietly that want everyone else to think that they know what they're competent and capable and whatever else, and don't ask silly questions. Well, they think are silly and ask questions. Actually, never learn. And I learned one of the things I learned as a presenter or a facilitator is I would be one of those people that probably wouldn't. I'd probably rather than ask, I'd probably tell, which was which was not a good thing to do. But I had the greatest admiration for the people that would ask questions because they were prepared. They didn't mind what other people thought. Their intent was they wanted to participate and learn, so they asked. Whereas the people that want everyone else to think that they're highly competent, they know what we're talking about, the rest of it, just sit there and say nothing and often don't learn.
Yeah.
So you can't grow unless you prepared to share with others what the things you need to change or to go, just to wipe your ego and just go, this is me. And now, and I think I've had a pretty good sense of people for a very long time, being in business. And so it's not my ability to, kind of understand people or read them. I've always had that, but it's actually the people I want to connect with. And you know what? Because I obviously can because I don't have a typical career now, Doug. I don't, and I don't want to know. I don't really want to be around people that aren't real. I
Mm.
don't mind who they are. Like they are who they are. I don't judge them. But being around people or encouraging people to be real is just so important.
Yeah. And like you say, that vulnerability to if every time they sat in a class they asked one question, they're vulnerable, letting others know
Yep.
that they weren't sure of that thing.
Yep.
But after the months go on, if they had it once a week, they're that much more knowledgeable because
Yep.
their specific question's been answered. And 3 months
Yes.
down the track, they've had a dozen questions answered, and they've
Yep.
got the information's locked in, and they're more intelligent than the
Absolutely.
others who won't because they made themselves
Absolutely.
vulnerable. They
Yep.
have, and then people will start coming to them and go,
Yep.
yeah, like, can you help me with this? Because I know you know more about
Yep.
it now because
Yep.
I hear you talking about it all the time.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they've probably got a lot more respect and they've probably got a lot more friends.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
people want to be around people that are real, that are not trying to, not doing something to get an outcome. They People, that they don't think, sitting there thinking they're superior or better or judging or whatever. So, it's never too you never it's never too late. You're never too old. And one of my greatest motivators for writing is to say, I don't think I'm better. I just want to share with you what I've learned and how I've grown and how I've become a better person and how I've become a more capable person. And they're not all of the just by being vulnerable and open and honest and saying, you know, you can change that pathway. You can engineer that pathway, and it's trying to master, at least having a red hot go at some of those 14 stages, and you can get to 59 or 60, and you can come to the best part of your life. But there's a whole bunch of things that bring you to the best part of your life, and you need to find presence in your life. You need to find stillness. You need to eat well. You need to keep your body moving, because the shell that we're in determines a great deal about our happiness and enjoyment later on in life and building some strength. But you can change the direction. My life direction has changed entirely, incomprehensibly from 60 years of age. I would even during the things that I was achieving that, for me, I thought were pretty cool. I had no concept, even 5 years ago, I had no concept my life could be where it's at now. I had an unlimited mindset. One of the things I talk about in the first book is how you create a mindset that when you find courage, purpose, and courage, you unshackle your mind, you unlimit it, but you can't always see what's coming. I could never have conceived 5 years ago that my life would be anything like anywhere near as good as this. That I could have more purpose. I have more purpose now than ever. I just feel so lucky and so privileged. But you can change it. It's one decision. Find your purpose. Use that. Use that. I Work out your legacy, what you want your legacy to be. Work out if you're the person who you really want to be, the person who are you the person you really would like to be. You can change any of that, just one decision, one day, and you go, no more. I am going to go and try and find the best me, a me I'm proud of. And you know what? If I don't achieve what I set out to do, if I gave it my best shot, that's what matters.
Awesome. But I think that's a pretty high note
A wrap.
to wind up on. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
thank you.
yeah. I don't want to cut you off, but I know you have a time limit there,
I
so
do.
we're
I do.
slowly approaching it.
Yep.
So yeah, I think we'll finish on that high note. That's awesome. I'll have your contact details in the show notes so people can
Thank you.
access your first book. And hopefully, as time goes on, your second book comes out. I know publishing books is never a fast thing. It doesn't, you don't
No.
finish it and then a week later it's in the stores. I know that can take
Yep.
many,
Yep.
many months plus. So
Yes.
yeah, people can be on the lookout for that one. And what's the
Thank
name
you.
of your second one again?
Greatness doesn't care, and the premise on the greatness doesn't care is it doesn't care. Greatness isn't for the privileged. It doesn't care who you are, where you've been, what you've done, what you look like, how much money you have, what color you are, what religion you are. It doesn't give a shit about any of that stuff, Doug. What it
Yeah,
does care about is you find your purpose and you go after it with everything you have. That's what it cares
awesome,
about.
awesome. Thank you, mate.
Okay. Thanks, mate. It's been brilliant. You have a fantastic day.
You too. Thanks, Jason.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. See ya.
Well, we're at the end of another thought provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition, it will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.